Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, one true God. Amen. May His grace and mercy be upon us, weak and sinful, in both worlds forever and ever. Amen. Welcome everyone to Urho the Way, an online English language ministry dedicated to spreading the love of the triune God as revealed in Jesus Christ through the traditions of the Syriac Orthodox faith. If you want similar content in Malayalam, please follow our parent platform called Haimonuso. And if you haven't followed us yet on Facebook, Instagram, on YouTube, please do. We've put the links in the description. Our guest today is Daniel Michalski. He is a chanter in the Oriental Orthodox Church in the Coptic Rite. He has a master's in Theological Studies from St. Athanasius and St. Cyril, Coptic Orthodox Theological School, and he did the first half of his master's from Westminster Seminary in California, a Reformed and Presbyterian school. He researches theology in general, and he focuses on Christology, Christianity, and Judaism, covenants, and social theology. So that's him right there with his wall of icons. And today we're going to talk to him because he has a paper which is called Christ and Corruption, Cyril of Alexandria, Julian of Halicarnassus, Severus of Antioch, and the Mortality of Christ. This is a paper which has been published in the Syriac Orthodox Patriarchal Journal in 2022. And the link to the paper is there on the screen, and also will be there in the video description. And for those who don't know, the Syriac Orthodox Patriarchal Journal is a peer-reviewed academic journal which comes out from St. Ephraim Theological Seminary in Marat Sayednaya in Syria. And it publishes articles, news, book reviews in Syriac, Arabic, English, other European languages related to Syriac Christianity, the Bible, liturgy, history, many others. And the editor-in-chief is our Patriarch, His Holiness Moran Mor Ignatius Ephraim II, and the executive editor is His Eminence More Severus Roger. And if you want, you can purchase the journal by following the instructions from the Syriac Patriarchate website, and that link will also be in the description. So, yeah, without further ado, let's welcome Daniel to Urho the Way. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Marin. Thank you.
Hello. Hey. So I think let's get straight into the questions. So, as a theology graduate and member of the Coptic Orthodox Church, how would you describe the impact the Syriac Church fathers have had on your spiritual life and in your studies that you've gone through?
I would say it's been very great. I was not always Oriental Orthodox, of course, with the last name like Michalski. So I actually have read more Syrian fathers than any other Oriental Orthodox fathers, but I have tried to read Copts, Armenians, Ethiopians, Indians, whoever I can read. But the Syrian fathers, especially St. Severus and St. Philoxenus, St. Dionysius bar Celebi, St. Moses bar Kepha, St. Jacob of Serug, I have read more than other Orthodox authors, and they are really the ones who have been formative for my theological and spiritual thinking within Orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that there are more English translations of Syriac fathers than the other churches?
I do think there are, and I do believe that that's quite helpful. And a lot of the Coptic translations are not very good translations into English. And so it is easier to read smoother translations, of course.
Yeah, I think I've also faced a similar problem trying to find, like, if you want references for like doctrines in the other, like Coptic or Armenian, you have to work hard to find them. or ask someone and like, okay, can you translate this for me? That's So that's a lot
Yes.
of work.
Though there are some really good Coptic translations of people like Father Matthew the Poor and
Yeah, right.
some of Pope Theodosius's sermons, as well as translations of Saint Gregory of Narek and Saint Gregory of Tatev in the from the Armenian Church.
Right. Yeah. I think I have to check those out. That's true. All right.
I would say, having come from the outside, I've always seen the Oriental Orthodox Church as one unit. So I know sometimes in Oriental Orthodoxy, unfortunately, we tend to just focus on our
Our own,
one
right?
cultural bubble,
Yeah.
right? But for me, I was like, oh, well, this is all my church. So
Yeah.
I'm
I wish
grateful
we could all think that way, but I think, it's hard. Yeah, I mean, growing up in the church is that way, right? You will focus narrowly, unless unless you have like visitors from the other churches, which we should do more often. But yeah, it's more. I hope it doesn't get siloed like that. Yeah,
we have started to have some pan-Oriental Orthodox liturgies here in Southern California, and I know that they've been doing it like over in the New York, New Jersey area for a good long time.
right. Yeah, that's a good step. Yeah. Okay. All right. Then let's get into the topic for today. And so your paper is focused on this very specific controversy that happened in the Oriental Orthodox Church. And not a lot of people might know about this. So then, can you give us some context about what's happening?
Yes. So, going back to the Council of Chalcedon, the Council of Chalcedon took place in 451 AD. And it was at that point that the first rupture happened between non-Chalcedonians, which today are called Oriental Orthodox, and Chalcedonians who broke into the Catholic Church, and then the Eastern Orthodox broke off of them, and then a few hundred years later, the Protestants broke off of them. But during the first 200 years or so after Chalcedon, there was actually a lot of effort on both sides, in spite of rather fierce polemical language that both sides were using, to bring about reunion. And both sides saw each other as essentially one church, even if they spoke of the other as departing from the faith. They still wanted and hoped for some ecclesiastical union for about 200 years after Chalcedon. And it's in that context, the century after Chalcedon, the 6th century, when it still wasn't clear that the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian churches were going to permanently separate, that there arose Severus of Antioch and Julian of Halicarnassus. And so in the middle of this time, when the Chalcedonians and the Orthodox were trying to work out their differences, you would sometimes have a Chalcedonian Patriarch of Antioch and sometimes an Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch. And you had similar controversy over who was the Patriarch in Alexandria. Severus of Antioch it became the Patriarch in 512 AD. Basically, Emperor Anastasius favored the Orthodox, and so he deposed Flavian II, who was the Chalcedonian Patriarch of Antioch, and replaced him with St. Severus.
Mm-hmm.
And St. Philoxenus of Mabug, who I mention in the paper, is an important figure to keep in mind in this. He was actually one of the 3 bishops who helped ordain St. Severus as Patriarch of Antioch. Justin in 518 AD, who was the successor of Emperor Anastasius, he was definitely not a Miaphysite and did not like the non-Chalcedonian faction. He exiled St. Severus in 518. Other bishops were exiled around that same time, including Julian, who was the bishop of Halicarnassus, which is the same city as Mabuk, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So Severus and Julian were both non-Chalcedonian bishops in the early 6th century AD, so the century after Chalcedon, when the lines between Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian were still not clear. And they both fled to Egypt. And they had been personal friends. So this was not something where there was any kind of personal animosity going on before the debate. They had been personal friends. They were both in exile in Egypt. Both were still considered the legitimate patriarchs of their sees by the non-Chalcedonians. And Julian proposed his Christology, which said that the humanity of Christ was immortal before the resurrection and impassible. And he proposed this thinking that he was simply saying the same thing St. Severus was saying, and thinking that St. Severus would approve. He sent a letter describing his Christology, or a document, I should say, describing his Christology to St. Severus. And St. Severus actually, because of his personal friendship with Julian, didn't respond for 2 years, even though he believed that his friend was espousing heresy. Another important thing to understand about the background is that the first half of the 6th century AD was a terrible time to be alive. Not just the political and religious upheavals and debates that were going on in the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds, but there were frequent plagues, famines, earthquakes. It was so devastating that the population of Thessalonica in Greece, or modern-day Greece, was reduced to a very tiny population well within the city walls, and most of the land within the city walls became farming land into the 900s.
Oh, wow.
So this was the kind of not just religious and political upheaval, but environmental upheaval that was going on. There were a lot of people dying from diseases, from famines, from earthquakes. It was a very difficult time to be alive.
Okay, yeah. There's a lot of chaos. Yeah, everyone, all the Miaphysite bishops, many of them got exiled to Egypt and different places. And yeah, and since they were friends, if we see some strong language in any of these letters, maybe they took it the right. I mean, they have the right to use strong language when they are friends, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah, it wasn't like there was any enmity or hostility between the two before this controversy.
Right. But once you bring all the followers into it, then it becomes much bigger, right? Yeah. I think, that's something that we should keep in mind even today when we go through, like, people discussing all these things online, right? That there's a lot of hatred and animosity going around. But I mean, basically, it's just we should approach it in a brotherly way. I mean, even Saint Severus not replying for 2 years, that shows like some restraint, about what he would say, or he really wanted to think about it and give a measured answer before like lashing out in anger. Right? It's something we could learn from. Okay, yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, he did not really, he probably did not appreciate that Julian actually quoted one of his homilies.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so do you think that the opposition from the Chalcedonians had any role in Saint Severus's response against Julian? Just because, I mean, it's already a hostile atmosphere outside all these exiled bishops, and on top of that, someone inside the camp is saying something like this.
I believe it did. St. Severus was articulate and had a very refined way of expressing Miaphysite Christology. He is the clearest writer from the time, and really one of the clearest writers ever at explaining non-Chalcedonian Miaphysite Christology. He was even clearer than St. Cyril or St. Philoxenus. And that's actually a point that I make in the paper, is with regards to St. Cyril, is that St. Cyril may have not been quite as clear about the issues regarding impassibility and immortality that arose in the 6th century debate, precisely because that wasn't his main focus. His main focus was the Nestorian debate. But St. Severus was careful to defend Miaphysite Christology properly. And so I do think his concern to defend against error on the one side, against the error of Chalcedonianism, made him see error the other way with Julian as being just as problematic as Chalcedonian Christology.
Okay. And so in your paper, I went through it, and then we have all these terms that keep coming up that, of course, all of us, these are very technical terms that means certain specific things in the context of these debates. So we have these terms: corruption, incorruptible, and impassible. And these are used to describe human nature and the nature of Christ as he was on earth. So can you give us an explanation of these terms?
Yes. So as I noted in the introduction to the paper, what I'm dealing with is specifically the use of these terms in relation to nature, not to morality. So these words can mean different meanings in different contexts, and even within the same author could have somewhat different meanings. Not being clear on how we're using these terms can cause confusion, as is clear, for example, with the confusion between the Armenians and the Syrians when they were really saying the same thing, and also in the Coptic liturgy. I deal with those two issues in the conclusion to my paper. So corrupted means something has become physically or mentally corrupted, broken down in nature. Corruptible means something is capable of undergoing decay, corruption, death. But doesn't tell us whether it actually has become corrupted or not. This is a very important distinction to make, and I press this point in the paper because even some very good scholars have failed to distinguish between corruptible, the ability to become corrupted, and corrupt, as in it already is corrupted. Incorruptible means something is incorruptible or incapable of undergoing decay or corruption, which I think makes it obvious that man was created corruptible but not corrupted, because you can't say that Adam was made incorruptible, because that would mean that he could not have fallen. But saying that man was made corruptible does not mean that he was made already corrupted. So he was made in a state of purity. He was made in a state of incorruption, of being above corruption, but not in a state of being incorruptible. So it's important to distinguish between incorruptible and incorrupted, and between corruptible and corrupted. Likewise, if Christ's flesh was incorruptible before the resurrection, then we can't say that he actually died.
Right.
And if we say that he was impassible, then we can't say that he actually suffered. So these are not little issues. We begin to see that these are issues that strike at the very heart of, could Christ have actually saved us? Did he actually assume our humanity and therefore redeem it? And again, understanding that this is referring to nature, not to issues of morality. So impassible means incapable of suffering. Passible means capable of suffering. And so if Christ in the flesh before the resurrection was not passible, capable of suffering, then we can't say that he really suffered, and we can't say that he was really crucified. And that was the point that St. Severus was driving home, because Julian of Halicarnassus was trying to say that Christ was impassible even before the resurrection. And as St. Severus was pointing out, how could he have really suffered? How could he have really died if it wasn't a passible, mortal, corruptible body that he took on?
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think this is similar to, I think I read in one of the fathers, that what is not assumed is not redeemed. If Christ has not actually borne any suffering or death, well, he hasn't really done anything for us, right? It's only an illusion. Like
Exactly.
He's not really done anything. He just appeared to suffer, appeared to die, appeared to rise again, and then it's like it's fooling us, right? In a way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
so
even
that's
just saying something that even in Islam, I think some sects might say that Jesus, I mean, they don't believe that he was God at all, but they do say that he suffered on the cross, or he was on the cross, and that he died. That was an illusion. So I was wondering if there was some connection there, but yeah, it's all going around in the same region of the world there. You can continue your point. You were saying something.
Yeah. So Saint Severus was pointing out, if you're saying that God incarnate had impassible flesh, impassible, incorruptible flesh, then you can't say that he was really crucified. You can't say that he really died. You can't say that he really suffered. And so now you have the same problem that you have with Nestorianism. You have the same problem that you have with Chalcedon, because the early Chalcedonians refused to say that God was crucified. And some of them have modified their position since then, and would be willing to say that God was crucified. But the early ones were refusing to say that. And so the problem with this is you have the same thing. If it isn't truly God on the cross, then he's not really suffering for us. he's not really taking on our humanity and redeeming it through his suffering and death. Either way, whether you have Nestorius's man indwelt by God or Julian's impassible suffering.
That's a good point. All of these discussions, they have something in common, and it's important to discern which is the right thing to believe, because I mean, as you said, it makes a big difference about what we actually put our faith in, and what we say in our prayers. Like, we actually say in our in our Trisagion that he who was crucified for us have mercy upon us. So there is no point in saying that if we actually didn't die.
Exactly.
Right, and that's fundamental. I mean, everyone knows that prayer. And I know that was a great point of controversy at that time as well. For the Trisagion, right? Like, defending the use of that phrase in the Trisagion, right? So,
Rabula of Edessa, before Chalcedon, talks about the Trisagion as saying, "Holy God, Holy Mighty, Holy Immortal, it was crucified for us."
Right.
It wasn't something that came later.
It's a good point. Yeah. We have so many.
Although when I say that, I don't mean to say that there might not have been some regional variation.
Oh yeah, definitely. But standardization is very far away.
I'm not trying to say that the Trisagion as directed to Christ was the only
version
possible practice.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think that was standardized in a way just to prove the point for Miaphysitism, that we declare that we are Miaphysitic by using this version of the Trisagion.
Right.
Let's do this. I was saying that with these concepts that we just explained, the difference between corruptibility and passibility, what would an average Oriental Orthodox person who's not involved in these debates, what would, and doesn't have a formal theological training, what would be the biggest takeaway from reading your paper?
So I'd say the biggest takeaway is to understand the dangers of Julianism and to really grasp that this is a serious issue. That the danger of any suggestion that the Logos did not truly take on humanity in its weakness is that fundamentally undermines our salvation, whether or not Christ could have saved us. It's vital to our understanding of salvation to say that he truly and voluntarily suffered. And I would say it's important that they see the suffering as voluntary. So not just that he suffered, but that he suffered voluntarily. And also I would encourage them to see that Christology is not a minor issue or something we can just dismiss as all saying the same thing. We aren't all saying the same thing. And these things really do affect whether the Word really assumed and thus redeemed our human nature. And when I say that, I'm not saying, okay, let's all be jerks. Let's not try and get along or talk with other churches. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is we do ourselves and other churches, Chalcedonians, whether Catholic, Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, no services. And we don't actually advance the conversation, the ecumenical conversation by simply saying, well, let's just say that we actually believed the same thing the whole time. We're not actually helping if we do that. And for our spiritual life, I would say for the Oriental Orthodox lay people, when we understand that it is truly God on the cross, and He, God in the flesh, is truly suffering and tasting death for us, this will transform our understanding of God's love and solidarity with humanity, of His participation in us, that we might participate in Him. And it transforms our understanding of how God is love. He is not a despot. He truly, voluntarily suffered with us in our nature. Once you see that, which I believe is most clearly seen in Orthodox Miaphysite Christology, the Christology of St. Severus, it will transform how you see God.
Right.
You will not see Him as someone to be afraid of anymore. You will not see Him as someone who is holding a hammer over your head or wanting to judge you, but truly as the God who has mercy and who participated in our humanity so that we might participate in Him.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, that He's not trying to manipulate you into following Him, but He's actually doing everything He can. Even going to death and truly die, right? To bring us back. Like what more can you do? That now it's the ball is in our court. Like, how do we respond? Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's actually mind-boggling that God will actually come down to do that. And He actually owes us nothing in terms of, He's already given us so much. Like, we don't. He doesn't owe us more than that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And yet He loved us.
Right. Yeah. While we were sinners. Okay. So another question that I got from a friend was, is there any implication from Saint Severus talking about incorruptibility to the Roman Catholic doctrine of Saint Mary being conceived immaculately?
I don't think that there's any direct connection. You might be able to have some indirect connection. We have different, the Oriental Orthodox and the Roman Catholics have different understandings of original sin, or the first sin. So to a great degree, we're asking different questions. And that can mean that we're often talking past each other with regards to these issues. What I would emphasize from our side is that St. Severus's point is that Christ took fallen flesh, but that this does not mean incorruptible or immortal flesh, contra Julian. So Severus said Adam was created mortal and corruptible, and Christ took fallen flesh, but that didn't address the question of mortal and corruptible. So in other words, Severus didn't equate fallen flesh with mortal and corruptible flesh. Severus saw Adam as being created mortal and corruptible. And the fall has to do with our loss of the Spirit and our loss of the gift of faith. Whereas Julian said that Adam, as created, was immortal and incorruptible, and that Christ was taking upon himself this unfallen flesh, which Julian assumed to be incorruptible. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Right. It's the starting point is different
Exactly.
in both
Exactly.
cases.
The two have different starting points. And I would say that this is an important point to note, because I have run into Oriental Orthodox who mistakenly take Julian's starting point and believe that Adam was created incorruptible and immortal. But that was Julian's starting point. So you can't get to Severus's conclusions when you're using Julian's starting point. You're going to have some confusion there if you try to do that. Julian said Christ took unfallen flesh and believed that Adam's unfallen flesh was incorruptible and immortal. Severus believed that Christ took our fallen flesh, but he did believe that Adam's flesh was corruptible and mortal as created.
Yeah. I think when we come into the question of Immaculate Conception, that's like a few levels above this foundation, right? So if we don't agree on the foundation, our conclusions are all, we don't understand each other. It's just that's how it comes across then in the end.
Exactly.
Right. So in the modern day, even then, I mean, there was a lot of unity between the Oriental Orthodox churches. Of course, they might have separately agreed to reject the Council of Chalcedon. And today, we have so many dioceses, or at least in the US, like we know that we have so many of these churches being together for the first time. So how important do you think is unity between these churches? And how important was it then for everyone to stay united and now?
I think that it's very important, and that it was then as well. One of the beautiful things about Oriental Orthodoxy is exactly that there is still that regional, local differences. So Armenians are not forced to worship like Copts, and Copts are not forced to worship like Syrians. And we're all allowed to have our own cultural, regional expressions. The development of something even like who does incense during the liturgy. The Armenians and the Syrians have a deacon walk around the church with the incense. Whereas a lot of Copts who grow up in the Coptic Church, where that is absolutely reserved for the priest, would probably be taken aback the first time that they visit a Syrian or an Armenian church. So these regional differences are okay, and that was how the early church was as well. And so I think that that's good to have those regional differences, but it's also important that we not judge one another over those differences, and that we see the fundamental unity of our faith, that we fundamentally have the same faith. We have the same faith in the Nicene Creed. We have the same sacraments, and those things we share with the Chalcedonians. But beyond that, what we don't share with the Chalcedonians, but we do share with one another, is that we do have this faith in the one incarnate nature of the Word, the incarnate Logos. And part of the emphasis of my paper is to say, yes, we really do have the same faith, and historical confusion between the Armenians and other Oriental Orthodox was a misunderstanding and a miscommunication.
Right. Yeah, that's not something a lot of us know. That I think in your paper you say that the Armenians don't actually venerate Saint Severus as a saint. Is that still the case?
So I have become aware since I published the paper of it being even more complicated
Okay.
than I had understood when I published the paper. There apparently are a couple lists of saints from the Armenian Church that do list Saint Severus, but by and large, he has not been historically venerated. And there have even been some bishops who were very opposed to him, including the 20th century Bishop of Central Europe. So, that being said, there is a lot more openness to taking a second look at Saint Severus within the Armenian Church. There was an event where the patriarchs of Alexandria, Antioch, and Armenia were together in celebrating liturgy in Lebanon, I believe, and they all three venerated the relics of Saint Severus. I would say that is a very clear sign of unity between our churches.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think I remember. I think we also shared that picture on our social media, but I don't think a lot of us realized that was something like important that to take note of. Yeah, actually, that's quite a big sign that their leaders are also publicly showing that that Saint Severus is being reconsidered. And I'm sure there are many figures throughout history who might have got a bad rep at the time, and then it just continues throughout history because no one takes their case again, right? Yeah, and it's just the isolation between the different churches that then further deepens that rift. But, yeah,
and sometimes personal feelings getting involved, like with Saint Dionysius Bar Celebi on the Syrian side.
Oh, right.
His sort of animosity towards the Armenians and willingness to say that they had Christological error was more his own personal history, because there was fighting between the Syrians and the Armenians on a political level.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Okay. All right. So,
and that is one thing that I'd note is it seems to me that most of our spats, other than this Julianist controversy, most of our spats, like intra-Nicene spats within Oriental Orthodoxy, tend to happen when we let the state get involved in church affairs, like has happened in the ongoing issues in Eritrea and also in India.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That I mean, yeah, that always complicates things. I think even in the Roman Empire, yeah, of course, all these emperors getting involved in all this decision making about what's orthodox, what's not. I'm sure that has a big hand in like splintering the church. And yeah, of course, all of us don't know about any other controversies apart. This is, I think, maybe the most famous controversy after Chalcedon for the Oriental Orthodox communion, and on the other side, they have their own ecumenical councils, like the iconoclasm, the like the Palamas councils. There were so many things going on there. But I think in the Oriental Orthodox world, we're just ravaged by wars, and we don't have time to get involved in Christological debates like that. Yeah, and even in the early church, I think there was more unity, and then once Constantine came along, and there was stability, which was a good thing, and then everyone had time to think and refine these things, and there were more arguments, but yeah, yeah. I mean, we can do better now,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Definitely, and I think it'll be important for our ecumenical dialogue, for like showing the Chalcedonians that the Oriental Orthodox have preserved the faith of Saint Cyril,
Right. Yeah.
that we have not changed our Christology, and for moving forward towards unity with Catholics and with Eastern Orthodox, going forward, we need to be committed to not letting governments mess with the affairs of the church, because that's a big reason why
Yeah.
Christianity got splintered in the first place.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think in a way it's inevitable, but our church leadership has to step up and take the right calls with regard to our faith.
Definitely. I think it's a very positive step forward, the recent meeting between Pope Francis and Pope Tawadros.
Right. Yeah. That's like a landmark event. Right?
Oh, yeah. It's an immense step forward.
Right. Okay. I think let's have a final question here. So I think one of my friends sent in a question here. So is there something that some excerpt from Saint Severus that affirms the incorruptibility of Christ before the resurrection, or is it corruptibility? This is the confusing part.
Corruptibility. I'm assuming you meant corruptibility.
Yeah, right. Okay. So I mean, again, this is where the people don't want to say that maybe that Christ is corruptible, but that's part of the reason why he is able to save us, right?
Absolutely, it is that he took corruptible flesh. So, Saint Severus's point is exactly that the flesh that Christ took upon himself, the flesh of the Logos incarnate, is corruptible and mortal flesh, so that he might be able to save us. If it wasn't corruptible, and it wasn't mortal, and it wasn't passable, then he couldn't have really suffered and died for us. But right there, it's important to notice the difference between corruptible and corrupted. So Saint Severus, in his synodical letter to Saint Theodosius, the Pope of Alexandria, writes as follows. I'm reading from Severus of Antioch, Allen and Hayward.
Okay. Yeah.
So then, those who assert that the flesh of our Savior, from its very establishment through the womb and union, was impassible and immortal, and who assign to it the incorruptibility which is recognized in impassibility and immortality, and not simply in holiness and sinlessness, and who foolishly suppose that they honor God with matters of surmise, first deprive us of healing and strip us of victory over the devil and death, and then defraud him of the honor which is due to him as healer and savior and benefactor. And on the other hand, we ourselves have been the cause of the most wicked blasphemy, to the effect that he mocked us and did not redeem us. For an impassible and immortal body does not admit of sufferings and death, but is considered to have suffered and died only in surmise, and as it were in an illusion of sleep. Now, if the sufferings are considered false, and Emmanuel did not die our kind of death, then in every respect his resurrection also is to be considered false, and all those things which relate to our redemption and the hope of resurrection which was promised to us are lost. Furthermore, we are unavoidably laid under the servitude of death if we were redeemed by nocturnal hallucinations and not in reality by the blood of his cross, and if we were not ransomed and set free from mischief by this divine blood, as the apostle declares. So then your holiness has affirmed right, well, and fittingly that the body of our Lord and Savior was consubstantial with us and suffered natural and voluntary sufferings like us, but without sin. And by this you have put away those who have dared to assert that he suffered in an impassible and immortal body, and you have shown that they are strangers to the divine sheepfold. It was clearly very important to him.
Right. Yeah.
And note also that he says near the beginning of this excerpt, the impassibility and immortality, not simply in holiness and sinlessness. So he makes it clear that we're not talking about moral immutability.
Right. This is bodily.
Or moral incorruptibility, that we're talking about bodily corruptibility.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that's very clear. That's, I mean, yeah. What can you say against that? He puts the consequence of believing right there, that we can't really be saved. All the gifts that come with that event, the crucifixion and resurrection, everything that we get is not there at all if we believe the other thing. All right. Yeah. Okay. I think that concludes this program. That was my last question. So thank you, Daniel, for giving us this paper and all the work that you've done on it, and explaining to us all these different terms and helping us to come to an understanding why it's important for our faith to believe in this specific doctrine, and that knowing it, that we will greater appreciate what our Lord has done for us. And I think I also wanted to mention that so you have a book that is out right now, which has been published by St. Shenouda Press in Australia. So
Yes.
do you want to talk about this book?
Sure. Thank you, Marin. And I do hope that I've come across clearly and that I've come across charitably in discussing these very important, very vital issues with regards to Christology. So I have put out a little book. It's only 40 pages. It's called The Spirit of Chrismation with St. Shenouda Press. It's from the St. Shenouda Monastery in Australia. It can be purchased through the St. Shenouda Press website, which is stshenoudapress.com. And it has a description of the meaning of the sacrament of Chrismation, of its timing in regards to baptism, and of its history, as well as some citations from ancient and modern fathers of the church on this important sacrament. It is mainly geared for catechumens or lay people who feel that they have not been properly taught about it growing up and still have questions about Chrismation. And so it's offered in the hope that it will help raise more understanding within the Orthodox Church of this very vital sacrament.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a great topic to focus on. I know it's just viewed by many people as just baptism part 2. It's right there and then, but it has a separate and important role in our sacramental life. Okay, so the link to purchase the book, I will put it in the description of the video as well. So if anyone is interested, they can purchase the book. And I think that's it. And we thank you, Daniel, and we wish you all the best for all your further studies and writing. And we hope to see you again in another program.
Thank you, Marin.
All right. So thank you everyone who's watching this program. God bless all of you, and hope you have a good morning, good night, wherever you are. Thank you.